The thermal paper burns in my grip. Proof my partner's been lying for 20 years. Robert Sterling forged my signature to frame me. And now his security guard's boots echo down the hall. I've got one fire extinguisher, a server drive full of evidence, and seconds before they lock me in forever. The racks hum with high voltage. My hands shake. If I don't move now, I'm not just trapped, I'm erased. The hum of the server rack vibrated through Marcus Thorne's heels, a low-frequency drone that mirrored the thrumming behind his eyes. In the dim Chicago workspace, the air smelled of ozone and scorched coffee. He pulled the collar of his wool sweater away from his neck, squinting at the dual monitors. Lines of green code flickered, illuminating the deep creases around his mouth. His fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard, clicking with metallic precision. He isolated the Silver Oak acquisition logs. A discrepancy surfaced. Transaction timestamps from the Cayman branch preceded the board's approval by 48 hours. Marcus leaned in, his nose inches from the glass. He traced a shell company signature, Aegis Holdings, which bled into a private account linked to Robert Sterling's personal offshore trust. This wasn't just a clerical error. It was the anatomy of a betrayal. Marcus reached into his pocket and found the small, smooth stone his father had kept on his desk until the day the old man's world collapsed. He rubbed it exactly 7 times, the cool surface warming against his thumb. The click-clack of the stone hitting his signet ring was the only sound in the room besides the cooling fans. Robert Sterling, his partner of 20 years, the man who had stood as godfather to his daughter, was cannibalizing their legacy. The digital trail screamed fraud. Sterling hadn't just acquired Silver Oak, he had laundered the buyout through Aegis, turning their firm into a personal piggy bank. Marcus gripped the edge of the desk, the laminate peeling under his thumb. This wasn't a mistake. It was a heist, executed by the only person Marcus had ever truly trusted. The shadows of the Chicago skyline loomed like jagged iron bars outside the window, casting long, bruised purple streaks across the office floor. Marcus knew the clock was ticking. He began copying the encrypted logs, the progress bar crawling with agonizing slowness. Every flicker of the screen felt like a heartbeat. He needed a witness, someone who could verify the data before Sterling's security team realized the vault had been breached. He had reached out to the only person with the technical brilliance and the desperate need for redemption to help him: Sarah Johnson. A soft rustle at the door made Marcus freeze, his hand tightening around the stone in his pocket. A woman in a bulky, oversized janitor's uniform pushed a trash cart into the room. She wore thick-rimmed glasses that were sliding down the bridge of her nose, and her fingertips were stained with ink. Sarah Johnson didn't look like a high-level forensic accountant, but she moved with a frantic, nervous energy that Marcus recognized. She looked at the door, then at Marcus, and whispered a quick "sorry" for no apparent reason. "Did you get in?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm in," Marcus said, stepping aside to show her the screen. "But I need this extracted. I need a trail that even Sterling's lawyers can't scrub clean." Sarah pulled a small silver drive from the pocket of her jumpsuit. It was lead-heavy and felt cold in the stagnant office air. "This is a high-speed bypass," she whispered, her fingers flying across the keys. "It mimics a standard backup so the internal alarms won't scream. But we have to be fast. The system does an automated sweep every 20 minutes to check for unauthorized ghosts in the wires." She paused, her eyes darting to her smartwatch. "Entry 4112. Sorry for breathing too loud." Marcus watched her work, the rhythmic tapping of the keys sounding like a countdown. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of floor wax and the metallic tang of the server racks. Sarah's brow was furrowed, her focus absolute despite the tremor in her hands. Sterling moved the capital through 3 different layers, she murmured, more to herself than to him. He used your digital signature to authorize the final release. Marcus, if this goes public without the context of the Aegis logs, it looks like you were the one holding the pen. That's why we need the source files, Marcus replied, his voice a low rasp. I want the proof that the money started in his trust. Suddenly, the green light on the server rack turned a sharp, angry red. A heavy thud echoed from the hallway, the sound of a security gate locking down. Marcus felt a jolt of adrenaline. They weren't alone. How much longer? He demanded. 90%, Sarah hissed, her eyes wide behind her lenses. Don't look at me, please. It makes it harder to think. The door to the server room swung open with a violent crash. A man stood there, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights of the corridor. He was massive, a slab-chested private security guard wearing the charcoal gray tactical vest of Sterling's personal detail. He didn't say a word. He simply reached for the heavy radio on his shoulder. Marcus didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his shoulders slamming into the guard's midsection before the man could call for backup. They tumbled into the narrow aisle between the humming server towers. The guard was a professional, his movements calculated and brutal. He threw a punch that caught Marcus in the jaw, sending a spray of copper-tasting blood across the white marble floor. Marcus felt the world tilt, the high-pitched whine of the servers filling his ears. He reached out blindly, his hand catching the cold metal handle of a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. As the guard lunged again, Marcus swung the heavy canister with everything he had. The metal collided with the guard's temple with a sickening, hollow thud. The man crumpled, his head hitting the edge of a server rack with a crack that sounded like a breaking branch. He slid to the floor, unconscious, a dark smear of blood marking the pristine white equipment. Marcus, it's done, Sarah shouted, pulling the silver drive from the port. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His jaw throbbed, and the smell of scorched dust filled his lungs. Go, he commanded, grabbing her arm. The elevator in the freight bay. Move. They sprinted through the darkened halls, the sickly purple glow of the city lights bleeding through the glass partitions. Every shadow looked like a predator. They reached the freight elevator just as the building's main alarm began to wail. A piercing, rhythmic shriek that vibrated through Marcus's very marrow. The doors slid shut, and for a moment, there was only the hum of the descent and the sound of their labored breathing. Sarah was staring at the silver drive in her hand, her face pale. We have it, she whispered. We actually have it. We have the evidence, Marcus said, straightening his wool sweater, trying to reclaim some shred of the composure that was his trademark. Now we find a way to burn him to the ground. The elevator doors opened into the cold, damp air of the basement parking level. Sarah stopped, her hand trembling as she opened her laptop to run a final verification of the files they had just stolen. Marcus watched her, his heart still hammering against his ribs. Marcus, she said, her voice dropping to a hollow whisper. There's something else. Something in the metadata of the whistleblower report sent to the SEC last month. Marcus frowned. What are you talking about? The SEC inquiry was supposed to be about the firm's stagnation. Sarah turned the screen toward him. Her eyes were filled with a sudden, sharp pity. The report wasn't about stagnation. It was an anonymous tip about the Silver Oak fraud. And Marcus, the digital fingerprint on the document, it's yours. It's your private key, your encrypted stamp. It was sent from your home network at 3 in the morning 3 weeks ago. The world seemed to stop. The damp concrete of the garage felt like it was shifting beneath Marcus's feet. He realized with a sickening clarity that Sterling hadn't just been stealing the company. He had been building a cage. Subverted beat. The 1.4. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing to find a logical explanation. "That's impossible," he said, his voice firm, the voice of a man who dealt in certainties. "My home network is isolated. I have 3 layers of protection. No one has that key but me. It must be a spoof, a clever imitation of my signature." He felt a surge of confidence. He was the architect of this firm's security. He knew his own walls. Sterling was a salesman, a charmer, not a ghost who could bypass Marcus's personal defenses. "Look at the routing," Marcus commanded, pointing at the lines of text. "He's trying to make us think he's already won. It's a classic diversion. If we follow this, we're doing exactly what he wants." Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over the trackpad. "You're right. You're Marcus Thorne. Nobody gets past your gate." She began to trace the origin of the signature, her face illuminated by the blue light of the laptop. "Wait, there. The packet headers show a momentary lapse in the handshake. It's a fake. It has to be. See? The time sync is off by a fraction of a second." She looked up at him, a small, relieved smile breaking through her anxiety. "You caught it. We can prove this was planted. We can show the SEC that the whistleblower was a puppet." Marcus felt the tension drain from his shoulders. He reached into his pocket and rubbed the stone. 7 times. The ritual worked. He was still in control. He was still the smartest man in the room. "We take this to the authorities ourselves," he said, his voice regaining its steel. "We show them the Aegis logs and the forged signature at the same time. We turn the trap back on him." He felt a brief moment of genuine victory. He had outplayed the master manipulator. But then he saw the crack. Sarah's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. Her eyes went wide, and her breath hitched in a way that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. She wasn't looking at the code anymore. She was looking at a hidden subdirectory that had just finished unzipping. A small red icon pulsed in the corner of the screen, a symbol of a recorded audio file. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant wail of the sirens. "Turn it up." The audio played. It was Marcus's voice, clear, unmistakable, and cold. He was speaking to a man he didn't recognize, discussing the Silver Oak buyout. "Sterling thinks he's in charge," the voice said, Marcus's voice. "But when the Aegis accounts hit the Cayman branch, he'll be the one holding the bag. I've set the signature to trigger the moment the board signs. He'll go to prison, and I'll have the firm." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow to the solar plexus. It wasn't just a forged document. Sterling had used a voice synthesis program, trained on 20 years of their recorded board meetings, to create a confession. But it was worse than that. As Sarah scrolled down, Marcus saw the true catastrophe. The Aegis logs they had just stolen? They weren't the real logs. They were a secondary set, a honeypot designed to be found. By downloading them onto this specific drive, they had just activated a script that broadcast Marcus's current location to the police and simultaneously sent the confession and the fraudulent logs to every major news outlet in the city. Marcus looked at his hands. They were shaking. He hadn't just failed to find the truth. He had hand-delivered the fabricated evidence of his own guilt to the world. He had walked into the server room and stolen his own death warrant. He wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. and he had just stepped directly into the center of the snare. The silver drive in Sarah's hand wasn't their salvation. It was the anchor that would pull them both under. "We have to go," Marcus choked out, but his legs felt like lead. The sickly purple light of the garage seemed to dim, the shadows of the concrete pillars stretching out like reaching fingers. He had lost everything: his reputation, his company, and his freedom. In the span of a single heartbeat, they scrambled into Marcus's car, a sleek, silver sedan that now felt like a glass coffin. He ignored the throbbing in his jaw and the metallic taste of blood. He had to think. He had to find a way to move. He drove out of the garage, the tires shrieking against the oil-slicked concrete. The Chicago wind howled through the skyscraper canyons, a relentless, freezing whistle that seemed to mock him. He needed a place to hide, a place where the sterling scan couldn't find him. He steered the car toward a public library on the outskirts of the city, a squat brick building that felt like a relic of a different era. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and stale dust. He found a remote terminal in the back, tucked away near the biography section. His fingers felt numb as he tried to log into the Sterling Thorne corporate accounts. He needed to freeze the assets, to stop the bleeding before Sterling could finalize the theft. Access denied. The words flashed on the screen in cold, white letters. Marcus tried again, his movements frantic. Credentials revoked. Contact administrative oversight. The board had already moved. Jennifer Wilson, the ice-veined perfectionist who headed the board, must have seen the leak. She wouldn't have hesitated. To her, Marcus was now a stain that needed to be scrubbed away. He could almost hear the snap of the paper towel dispenser in her private bathroom, the sound of her washing him out of existence. He was locked out of his own life. "They're faster than we thought," Sarah whispered, standing behind him, her eyes darting toward the library entrance. "The board. They're not even waiting for an investigation. They're just cutting you loose." "Sterling planned the timing," Marcus said, his voice hollow. He knew exactly when the news would hit. He's probably in the boardroom right now, playing the grieving partner, promising to clean up the mess I made. He felt a surge of cold fury, but it was dampened by the sheer weight of his isolation. He had no money, no access, and no allies left except a terrified accountant who apologized for breathing. They left the library, the bruised purple sky of Chicago pressing down on them. Marcus knew he couldn't go home. He couldn't go to his club. He drove to a derelict motel on the edge of the industrial district, a place where the neon sign flickered with a dying buzz, and the air smelled of stagnant heat and cheap cigarettes. He parked the car in the back, under a flickering security light. As he stepped out, he heard a sharp, hissing sound. He looked down. His front tires were collapsing, the rubber sighing as the air escaped through long, jagged gashes. Someone had been waiting. Marcus reached for his phone, his last link to the world. As he pulled it from his pocket, the screen flickered once, then went dark. A string of white text scrolled across the black glass. System wipe initiated. Secure erase in progress. He watched, helpless, as his contacts, his messages, his entire digital life dissolved into nothingness. He was being systematically erased, one bite at a time. The isolation was complete. He stood in the middle of the oil-stained parking lot, the freezing wind biting into his skin, holding a dead piece of glass in his hand. "Marcus," Sarah said, pointing toward the street. A black SUV, its windows tinted to a mirror finish, was idling at the entrance of the motel. The engine was a low, predatory growl. The headlights cut through the gloom, blinding them. Marcus didn't wait to see who was inside. He grabbed Sarah's arm and lunged back into his car, the rims grinding against the pavement as he threw it into reverse. The chase was a blur of screeching tires and blinding flashes of light. The SUV was relentless, ramming into Marcus's rear bumper with a force that made his teeth rattle. The Chicago streets were a labyrinth of chaos, filled with the wail of sirens and the glare of streetlights. Marcus pushed the car to its limit, the engine screaming in protest. He swerved through narrow alleys, the side mirrors clipping the brick walls with a shower of sparks. He saw a construction site ahead, the sidewalk narrowed by heavy wooden barriers and scaffolding. It was a gamble. He jerked the wheel, the car mounting the curb and bucking wildly as it tore through the narrow gap. The SUV, too wide to follow, slammed into the barriers, the sound of twisting metal echoing through the street. Marcus didn't stop. He drove until the car groaned and died, the engine smoking. He found a dark, multi-level parking garage and abandoned the vehicle in a corner, tucked behind a concrete pillar. He and Sarah climbed out, their breath coming in white plumes in the freezing air. "We have to get off the street," Marcus said, his voice a jagged edge of its former self. "They're tracking us. I don't know how, but they're always one step ahead." They walked for hours, sticking to the shadows, the city feeling like a vast, hostile machine designed to crush them. Marcus led them to a quiet park near the lake, the trees skeletal and black against the gray morning light. He had one last card to play. He had called David Vance, his personal attorney, from a burner phone he'd bought at a gas station. Vance was the best, a man who knew where every body was buried in the city. Vance was waiting for them on a park bench, his hair perfectly groomed, his bright yellow pocket square a jarring splash of color in the drab morning. He looked at Marcus with a professional mask of concern. "Marcus, thank God," Vance said, standing up. "I've been trying to reach you. The situation is catastrophic. The SEC has already frozen your personal accounts. They're calling it the largest case of corporate embezzlement in a decade." "I didn't do it, David," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Sterling framed me. I have the drive. We can prove it." Vance nodded, taking the silver drive from Marcus's hand. "I'll get this to my forensic team immediately. We'll build the countersuit. We'll show them Sterling's hand in this. Don't worry, Marcus. I'm on your side." Subverted beat 2.5. Marcus felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. David Vance had been his legal shield for 15 years. He was the man who had navigated the firm through 3 hostile takeovers and a dozen federal audits. He was expensive, he was ruthless, and he was loyal. Marcus watched him tuck the silver drive into his breast pocket, right behind the silk pocket square. "I've already drafted the emergency injunction," Vance continued, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll file it before the markets open. We can freeze Sterling's ability to sign the Silver Oak papers by claiming he's under internal investigation. It's a solid move, Marcus. It buys us the time we need to decode the real logs." Sarah stood beside Marcus, her shoulders dropping for the first time in 12 hours. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she whispered. "I was so afraid we were alone." Vance smiled, a warm, professional expression that reached his eyes. "You're never alone when you have the right counsel." "Marcus, go to the safe house I told you about. Get some sleep. I'll handle the filing. By noon, the tide will start to turn." He patted Marcus's shoulder, a firm, grounding touch. Marcus exhaled, the freezing Chicago air finally feeling like it wasn't trying to choke him. He had a plan. He had an expert. The system he had spent his life mastering was finally working in his favor. But then, he noticed the detail. Vance turned to walk toward his car, a sleek black sedan parked at the edge of the park. He didn't just walk. He began to navigate the path with a strange, looping trajectory. He reached a fork in the sidewalk, a simple choice between a left turn toward his car or a right turn toward the street. Vance hesitated for a fraction of a second, then turned right, taking a wide, 30-minute detour around the park's fountain to reach a destination that was only 20 feet to his left. Marcus froze. He remembered a conversation from 5 years ago, a late-night drink after a successful merger. Vance had mentioned his brother, killed in a car accident during a left-hand turn. Since then, the man refused to make them. It was a quirk Marcus had always found eccentric, even endearing. But then, Marcus looked at the car Vance was heading toward. It wasn't Vance's usual Mercedes. It was the black SUV from the motel. The truth didn't just dawn on Marcus, it shattered him. He looked at Vance's GPS logs in his mind. The man was the brother-in-law of the lead investor in Silver Oak. The very merger Sterling was trying to force. "David!" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing across the empty park. Vance stopped and turned back. The warmth was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, clinical indifference. He didn't look like a friend. He looked like a predator who had just finished a meal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver drive, tossing it casually into the air and catching it. "You always were obsessed with structure, Marcus," Vance said, his voice devoid of its previous comfort. "But you forgot that a structure is only as strong as the people holding it up. Sterling offered me a seat on the new board. A permanent seat. Do you know what you offered me? More billable hours and the chance to go down with a sinking ship." Two men stepped out of the SUV, the same thugs from the parking lot. They weren't there to arrest Marcus. They were there to ensure he never made it to the SEC. Vance hadn't been preparing a defense. He had been feeding Marcus's every move, every thought, every strategy directly to Sterling. The safe house Vance had mentioned? It was likely a one-way trip to a shallow grave. "The drive is encrypted, David," Marcus hissed, his hand tightening around the stone in his pocket. "Sterling has the keys, Marcus," Vance replied, stepping into the back of the SUV. "He's had them since the moment you downloaded the files. You didn't just give me the evidence, you gave me the only copy. There is no countersuit. There is only your confession." The SUV sped away, leaving Marcus and Sarah standing in the middle of the park as the sun began to bleed over the horizon of Lake Michigan. Marcus felt a sudden, sharp itching on his wrist. He looked down at his cufflinks, the heavy silver ones Sterling had given him for their 20th anniversary. He tore one off and smashed it against the concrete. Inside, a tiny green light flickered. A GPS tracker. Sterling hadn't been following him. Sterling had been guiding him. Every move Marcus had made to save himself had been choreographed by the man who knew him better than anyone else. Marcus threw the broken cufflink into the dark, freezing water of the lake. He was stripped of his money, his lawyers, and his evidence. He was a ghost in his own city, and the man he called a brother was holding the knife. The sun rose, a pale, sickly disk against the gray Chicago sky. The wind had died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Marcus and Sarah sat in a small, 24-hour diner, the smell of burnt grease and cheap coffee thick in the air. Marcus's face was a map of exhaustion and defeat. "There has to be something else," Sarah whispered, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "A man like Sterling, he doesn't just win. He leaves a trail." She was scrolling through a local copy of the original partnership agreement from 1994, a document Marcus hadn't looked at in 2 decades. Suddenly, she stopped. Her finger traced a line of faded text near the bottom of page 84. Marcus, look at the poison pill clause. Section 12B. Marcus leaned in, his eyes squinting at the screen. In the event of an undisclosed third-party acquisition attempt by a primary partner, the secondary partner retains the right to execute a unilateral share dilution of up to 60%, provided the action is taken before the formal signing of the transfer. Asterisk. Sterling forgot. Marcus whispered, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. He was so focused on the Aegis fraud that he forgot the original foundation. If I can get to a secure terminal, one with administrative bypass, I can dilute his shares to nothing. He won't have the voting power to finalize the Silver Oak deal. The whole house of cards will collapse. But the office is a fortress, Sarah said, and the signing is in 3 hours. We don't go to the boardroom, Marcus said, his voice regaining its architectural precision. We go to the private gym. Sterling has a secure terminal there for his early morning trades. He thinks he's the only one who uses it. They reached the Sterling Thorne headquarters as the city was waking up. The building looked like a giant glass tomb. Marcus used a maintenance key he'd kept on his ring for years, entering through the laundry intake. They moved through the service corridors, the air smelling of industrial bleach. The private gym was on the 42nd floor, a vast, mirrored space filled with the scent of recycled air and expensive leather. Marcus headed for the glass-walled office in the corner, his heart hammering. He sat at the terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. I'm in, he whispered. Initiating the dilution sequence, just 10 more seconds. You always did like the gym, Marcus. The irony of building a body you never use. Marcus froze. He turned slowly. Robert Sterling was standing by the weight racks, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. He looked tan, relaxed, and utterly lethal. Behind him, the massive frame of James Miller, Sterling's head of security, blocked the exit. Robert, Marcus said, his voice steady. Did you really think I forgot Section 12B? Sterling asked, walking toward him with a slow, predatory grace. I wrote that clause, Marcus. I put it there to see if you'd ever be smart enough to find it. And you were. 20 years later, but you found it. Sterling lunged. He wasn't a corporate executive in that moment. He was the boy who had survived a childhood of violence by becoming the architect of it. He slammed Marcus against the glass wall, his fingers digging into Marcus's throat. Marcus fought back, his hands grasping for anything. But Sterling was younger, stronger, and fueled by a lifetime of hidden resentment. You think you're the hero? Sterling hissed, pinning Marcus against the window. The city of Chicago stretched out 40 floors below them, a dizzying drop of steel and stone. You're a ghost, Marcus. You're a relic of a father who died of failure. And now, you're going to join him. Sterling pressed harder, the glass groaning under the pressure. Marcus felt his vision begin to tunnel. He looked into Sterling's eyes, cold, predatory, and completely hollow. The codes, Marcus, Sterling whispered. Cancel the dilution, or I'll see how well you fly. I won't, Marcus gasped, his hand reaching into his pocket for the stone. Sterling laughed, a jagged, horrible sound. He pulled a tablet from his jacket and held it in front of Marcus's face. I thought you might say that. So I took some insurance. The screen showed a live video feed. It was a small, windowless room. In the center, tied to a wooden chair, was Emily, his daughter. Her black dyed hair was matted, and her silver lip ring was gone, leaving a small, dark bruise. She wasn't screaming. She was humming, that low, haunting funeral dirge she always sang when she was terrified. "She's at the summer house, Marcus," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you don't sign the transfer and cancel the dilution in the next 5 minutes, James here makes a phone call. And Emily, well, she's always been such a tragic girl, hasn't she?" Marcus felt the world dissolve. The company, the money, the fraud, it all vanished, leaving only the image of his daughter's terrified eyes. He had lost. Not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he had underestimated the capacity for evil in the man he called a brother. "I'll sign," Marcus whispered, his voice a broken thread. "Good," Sterling said, releasing his grip. "Let's go to the boardroom. We have a show to start." The boardroom was a high-end coffin, the mahogany walls pressing in on Marcus as he sat at the long, polished table. Jennifer Wilson stood at the head, her gray suit impeccable, her eyes fixed on the coffee stain on Marcus's sweater with visible disgust. "The documents are ready, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clinical. "Once you sign, your divestment is complete, and the Silver Oak merger will proceed under Mr. Sterling's sole direction." Marcus looked at the pen in his hand. It felt like a mountain. He looked at Sterling, who was leaning back in his chair, counting the ceiling tiles with a faint, triumphant smile. "One more thing," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "I need to verify the admin sync, for the record." "Don't stall, Marcus," Sterling warned, his eyes flicking to the tablet on the table. Marcus typed a sequence into the boardroom terminal. To Sterling, it looked like a standard administrative logout. But Marcus wasn't logging out. He was triggering a dead man's switch he had written into the company's core architecture years ago. A failsafe designed to ping the GPS location of the last active admin login in the event of a hostile takeover. The screen flashed once. A small blue dot appeared on a map in the corner of the monitor. Location: 1422 Lakeside Drive, Sterling's summer house. Marcus looked at the tablet. The video feed was still live. He saw a shadow move in the background of the room where Emily was held. Then, the sound of a door being kicked in, the crash of flashbangs, shouting. "What is that?" Sterling demanded, leaning forward. On the screen, a team of tactical police swarmed the room. They cut Emily's zip ties. She collapsed into the arms of an officer, still humming that mournful tune. "The police are at your house, Robert," Marcus said, his voice suddenly cold and clear. "I didn't just track the logs. I tracked the admin signal you used to check the feed." Sterling lunged for the table, but Marcus stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. The doors to the boardroom swung open. A group of men in dark suits entered, not the Amazon executives Sterling had been expecting to buy the firm, but federal agents led by Michael Davis. "Robert Sterling, you're under arrest for corporate fraud, kidnapping, and embezzlement," Davis said, his voice soft but absolute. Sterling looked around the room, his face contorting into a mask of pure animal rage. He looked at Jennifer Wilson, but she had already turned away, washing her hands in the small sink in the corner of the room, scrubbing him away like a stain. "You think this is over?" Sterling spat as James Miller was tackled to the floor by 3 agents. "I'll buy the jury, Marcus. I'll be out in a year." "You won't," Marcus said, stepping close to him. "Because before they take you, you're going to sign one last document." Marcus pushed a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. "A total divestment of all your shares and assets in Sterling Thorne. To me, for exactly $1. You sign it, or I give the feds the real Aegis logs, the ones I kept on a physical drive you never found." Sterling stared at him, his chest heaving. For a moment, the two men stood in the silence of the boardroom, the ghosts of 20 years of friendship flickering between them. Then, with a jagged, trembling hand, Sterling signed. Marcus watched as they led Robert away in handcuffs. The Sterling scan was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had finally lost everything. As the elevator doors closed on his former partner, Marcus felt no triumph, only a vast, echoing emptiness. A week later, Marcus stood alone in his Hamptons house. The monochromatic white decor felt like a high-end asylum. The hum of the pool filter vibrated through his teeth, a low-frequency reminder of the silence that now filled his life. He held a piece of thermal paper in his hand, the original receipt from the first office he and Robert had rented in 1994. It was faded, the ink almost gone. He looked out at the ocean, the water deep, dark, and indifferent. He had the company. He had $50 million. But his daughter wouldn't speak to him, and his best friend was a monster in a cage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, smooth stone. He rubbed it once, twice, 3 times. Then he stopped. He walked to the window and tossed the stone into the surf. He watched it disappear into the gray waves, a tiny, solid thing swallowed by the vast, shifting blue. The American dream was a hollow shell, and Marcus Thorne was finally, truly alone. The end. Do not proceed past this point.